Chapter 4, what is an IEP and what is the principal's role? And Chapter 5, what does a principal need to know about special education placement? By Kristen R. Herring for EDLD 5623, Developing Leaders, under Dr. Kimberly Wilkerson. Individualized education programs, also called IEPs, are for students with disabilities. They are an instructional tool which provides placement goals and objectives, identifies the services that a student will receive and time allotted for service, and gives accommodations and modifications. Communication. It provides information to all stakeholders, including parents and school, because they get to help build the IEP together. Provides needed information to the faculty and staff involved in the student's education. It's a tool for management. Explains what is required by educators and documents needed resources. Accountability. Legal agreement between the district and stakeholders. Follows a student if he or she transfers schools. Enables stakeholders to make sure that needs are provided. And then it provides monitoring and evaluation, which establishes a point of contact, is used when investigations have to be completed to check for compliance, and it provides a place to monitor achievement of goals. Bateman and Bateman, 2014. Administrator's Guide to Developing an IEP. In pre-meeting, or prior to the first meeting, administrators should gather information, and they should read referrals and testing results, ask questions of those who were involved, read past IEPs if there are any, ask for teacher recommendations. Then consider needs and staff caseloads so that you don't overload staff. Schedule the meeting, make sure to invite all the stakeholders, including special ed and general ed teachers, SPED administrators, parent guardians, advocates, students if they're old enough and in high school, representatives, and family designees. Then document parents' knowledge of the meeting, arrange for an interpreter if you need to, and observe students in class. While the administrator is in the meeting, it's important that everyone eliminates the school jargon so that it's easy to follow. Document what is discussed and decided, decide on the student's level and needs, determine how the needs are going to be addressed and the time that's needed to address them, allow each stakeholder a voice. All stakeholders should then sign documentation. If they were present, determine a date and time for an annual evaluation, sometimes called an annual review. Focus on the objectives and goals, and plan for keeping the family informed throughout the year. After the meeting, all the faculty needs to sign off that they received the IEPs. They should monitor students' progress with the faculty. Administrators should keep families informed or make sure that they have been on progress throughout the year. Schedule another IEP meeting if goals are not being met. Bateman and Bateman, 2014. IEPs from other districts. School has to decide whether or not they want to follow the IEP that a student brings in or create a new one. Working with families. Confirm that families understand the IEP is very important. Explain the disability and reasoning for the diagnosis. Explain their choice to have an independent evaluation if the family would like one. Reason out students' placement in an academic program. Explain the goals and objectives and how monitoring will occur. Explain due process. And then document all interactions throughout the year with the family, including calls, letters, notes, emails, and home visits. Be sure to include the student if they're 16 or over. Bateman and Bateman, 2014. The components of the IEP. First, determine the student's level of success and ability. Set measurable goals that the student is expected to achieve in a year. Identify the objectives to help meet the goal and describe how the goals and objectives will be met. List all services and the time that's needed, and be sure to include summer needs if there are any. List resources and modifications that will be followed. Identify the timeline. Describe monitoring process. Explain when the student will be in with general ed population and aim for a least restrictive environment. Academic programs that are needed, school setting needed, assessment needs, and transition from post-secondary career and or education should be included in the IEP as well. Bateman and Bateman, 2014. Inclusion it occurs in a general education class where students are present with and without disabilities. This can be a co-taught class with a general ed and special ed teacher together. Individuals with Disability Education Act, also known as IDEA, began with Education of All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, requiring districts provide an atmosphere that does not remove a student with a disability from general ed any more than necessary. Mainstreaming began in the 70s and 80s. This was a term used to describe a student's placement in settings with general ed students in areas where the student is prepared. Inclusive practices began in the 90s when students with disabilities were in general education settings with support all day. And now we have inclusion, where students with disabilities will spend as much time as possible in a general ed setting, including classrooms and extracurricular activities, with modifications and accommodations in place to help them achieve. Pull-out services are an option to better prepare students for general education if necessary. And federal law for IDEA, students who are disabled are to be in class with students who are not disabled, except in cases where a general education class cannot supply the student's needs or services. Bateman and Bateman 2014. Determining the best placement for special education students. These are the questions that need to be discussed when considering the placement for these students. What steps have been taken to try to include the student in general education classrooms? Have supplementary aids and services and modified grading been tried? Compare the benefits of both settings for the student. What negative effects may result from placing the student in an inclusion classroom? What has the school done to provide interaction between the student that's in inclusion classes with students in general ed classes? School IEP teams are to evaluate whether or not the student is capable of being successful in a general education classroom, whether supports and services are provided, or if modifications are in place. If the team has not done this, they may be found to have wronged the student. Bateman and Bateman 2014. The principal's role in the implementation and support of inclusion. It's important to make the faculty and staff aware of laws for students with disabilities, of the building blocks of the academic programs for SPED, and of the need for the least restricted environments for SPED students. Consider even distribution of aids and services and classes to support your staff and students. Plan for a time for all stakeholders to meet and plan and receive professional development, and make every effort that you can to be engaged in the special education department and in the decision-making process. Bateman and Bateman 2014. Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, PSEL. I found 3 standards aligned to these 2 chapters. Standard 3 says educational leaders should provide an equitable education and culturally responsive practices that lead to every student's achievement. They should provide equitable access to the best teachers, environment support services, and resources. Standard 4, educational leaders are to provide academic support to build curriculum, instruction, and assessment that leads to every student's achievement. You see this when they have knowledge of the developing child, pedagogy, and each student's needs. Standard 5, educational leaders create an inclusive, caring, and supportive environment that leads to the achievement of all students. It is important that administrators seek to meet the academic, social, emotional, and physical needs of every student. NPBEA 2015.